My daughter perished in a horrific accident. The morning after her funeral, a stranger found me on the church steps and handed me a key. Odette whispered, "She is waiting. Come." She never mentioned this place. I flew across the country because 4 words on a card told me to come. But as the door opened, I froze. Sitting there was the very person I had just laid to rest at the cemetery. A terrifying truth began to unfold, one that the traitor could never have anticipated. The casket was pale gray. That detail lodged in me like a splinter from the moment I saw it. Something about it felt off, deeply stubbornly wrong. Celia despised white. She used to say it was the color of surrender, of giving up without a fight. The walls of her apartment ran deep olive and warm ember colors she had chosen herself with great deliberateness. Her favorite coat was the color of red wine. Welcome to Father's silent revenge. I'm glad you found your way here today. If stories like this one speak to you, tap subscribe so the next one reaches you when it drops. Before we go further, are you listening on headphones right now or through a speaker? I always find a story like this one lands differently when it's right in your ear. One more thing, some narrative elements in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to specific real individuals or events is coincidental. It's the truth inside the story that matters. She wore mismatched socks on purpose, laughing every time someone noticed. White was the last color my daughter would have chosen for herself. But there it was, buried under an avalanche of white lilies, sitting at the front of St. Clement's Episcopal Church, while 200 people in black filled the pews behind me. I sat in the first row alone. My name is Leonard Whitfield, 67 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a federal financial inspector, tracking fraud, dismantling schemes, following money through shell companies and offshore accounts, until the truth had nowhere left to hide. I was good at my job. Some people said I was the best. But sitting in that church on that Tuesday morning in January, staring at a casket that held what remained of my only daughter, I felt like the most useless man alive. The police said it was a car accident. Early morning black ice, a stretch of road outside the city. The vehicle struck a concrete barrier and caught fire so completely that by the time first responders arrived, there was nothing left to identify. No DNA, no fingerprints, no face to say goodbye to. They identified her through dental records. Case closed within 72 hours. I never saw those records. At the time, it didn't occur to me to ask. Grief has a way of making even the sharpest mind go completely, terrifyingly blank. I stared at the casket and tried to recall the last time I'd heard her laugh. 4 months ago, a Sunday afternoon call, her voice bright and warm, telling me about a crow that had landed on her studio window and refused to leave for 3 hours. She said she named it Archibald, said Archibald had strong opinions about her painting technique. I laughed with her. I told her I'd call the following Sunday. I had no idea that would be one of our last easy conversations. My attention moved to the man at the podium. Rowan Strand, my son-in-law, 44 years old, CEO of EtherX Technologies, the kind of face that photographers loved and juries believed. 6 years ago at the wedding, I had shaken his hand and told him to take care of my daughter. He had looked me in the eye and said, "She'll always be safe with me, Leonard." I watched his hands. In 31 years of federal work, I had learned that grief does specific things to the human body. It makes the hands restless. It puts a particular weight behind the eyes that no one can rehearse. I had interviewed hundreds of people in the worst moments of their lives. I knew exactly what real devastation looked like. What I was watching did not look real. Rowan's hands were perfectly still, not the stillness of a man holding himself together, the stillness of a man who had rehearsed stillness. His pauses landed at exactly the right moments. His voice broke on exactly the right words. When he stepped back from the podium and accepted water from Harlan Beckett, my family lawyer, he drank it in 2 measured sips without a tremor. Harlan caught my eye across the room, a look I couldn't immediately interpret, something between caution and communication. Then Rowan leaned close and said something in his ear, and Harlan looked away. I filed that away. After the service, Rowan placed both hands on my shoulders and looked at me with an expression of such practiced, perfect sorrow that something cold moved through my chest. "She would have wanted you to be strong, Leonard," he said. 5 words, 11 syllables. And in 31 years of sitting across from people who were lying to me, I had learned to listen, not just to what people said, but to what they chose to say, instead of something else. He didn't say, I miss her. He didn't say, I can't believe she's gone. He said she would have wanted to. Past tense, already settled, already filed away. Thank you, Rowan, I said. He squeezed my shoulders and moved on. I stood in the emptying church surrounded by white lilies Celia would have despised, and felt something shift in the back of my mind. Not grief, not anger, something quieter and far more dangerous than either. A question. What exactly was in that casket? I buttoned my coat and walked out into the January cold. I didn't have an answer yet, but I would find one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window with a glass of scotch I never touched, watching the city lights blur and sharpen through the glass as the hours crawled past. The January wind rattled the frame every few minutes. I let it. I had no energy for anything except turning that one question over and over in my mind, like a stone I couldn't put down. What exactly was in that casket? By 3 hours in the morning, I had convinced myself I was being irrational. I was a grieving father. Grief distorts things, bends a carefully trained mind into shapes it was never meant to hold. By 4 in the morning, I had unconvinced myself again. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note the young woman had pressed into my hand at the church. I had forgotten it completely. I unfolded it carefully, the paper soft from hours of warmth. A pencil drawing no bigger than my palm, a cicada wing, spread body rendered in extraordinary detail. Underneath, in handwriting, I recognized immediately 4 words. The shell is empty. My hands started trembling. I knew Celia's handwriting the way I knew my own heartbeat. The same looping capital she'd had since age 9. The same slight leftward slant no penmanship workbook had ever corrected. This was hers without question. I pressed the note flat against my thigh and read it again. The shell is empty. A cicada sheds its shell and flies away. I pressed the note flat against my thigh and read it again, and I did not let myself interpret it. Not yet. Not until I knew. My throat tightened until swallowing became something I had to consciously execute. I pressed my fist against my mouth and forced myself to breathe in through the nose hold for 4 counts out through the mouth. It didn't help, not even close, because if that note was from Celia, if she had written it and arranged for it to reach my hand at her own funeral, then my daughter was alive. And if my daughter was alive, then everything I had accepted in the past 72 hours was a lie constructed by the man who had stood at her podium with perfectly still hands. I was out of the armchair before I made a conscious decision to move. The next morning was gray and bitter. I walked to St. Clement's before 8 stood on the front steps in my heaviest coat and watched the street without entirely knowing what I expected to find. That was when I noticed the man across the street, 6'2" arms folded against a black town car, gray wool cap pulled low. He was looking directly at me, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away. He crossed the street in long, unhurried strides and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Whitfield," he said. "That's right," I said. "And you are." "Someone your daughter trusts," he said. My heart slammed against my ribs. "My daughter is dead," I said carefully. Inside the envelope was a key, a single key on a plain steel ring, the kind cut for a high-security residential lock with no label and no identifying marks. Beneath it, folded once, was a small card in Celia's handwriting. The Meridian Apartment, 99, Portland, Washington. Below the address, 4 words in her hand. "She is waiting. Come." My hand shot to the iron railing. My knees stopped cooperating entirely. I gripped the cold metal and squeezed until the feeling came back. "Mr. Crow." My voice came out scraped, raw, barely controlled. My daughter's funeral was yesterday. I sat in that church. I watched them. And now you're standing on these steps telling me she retained you 18 months ago for a time-sensitive matter. I stopped, pressed my mouth shut, breathed. "What exactly are you not telling me?" Gareth Crow looked at me with the careful, composed expression of a man who has delivered difficult information before and understands that the kindest thing he can do is be precise. "My instructions were to give you the key and the address," he said. "Nothing more. Your daughter was very specific about that," she said, and I am quoting her directly. "He'll understand when he gets there. He just needs to get there." He closed his briefcase with a quiet click. I've done what she asked, Mr. Whitfield. The rest is yours, Mr. Crow. I grabbed his arm before he could turn away. My grip was not entirely steady. Is she safe? Can you tell me that much? He looked down at my hand on his sleeve. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time, something moved behind those careful, professional eyes. Not quite an emotion, but the shape it leaves when a person has spent considerable effort holding it at a precise distance. She was alive and safe when she gave me my instructions, he said, his voice barely above a murmur. That is what I know. That is what I am authorized to tell you. He laid his hand briefly over mine on his sleeve, a small human gesture there and gone in a heartbeat. Then he stepped away. Take the first available flight, he said. She said, you wouldn't need more reason than that. My eyes burned so hard I had to tilt my head back and press my fingertips against the bridge of my nose. When I looked back down, I said the only thing that mattered. What time is the first flight to Eugene? 6 a.m. tomorrow? He said. I've already booked your seat. You were very sure I'd say yes. No second opinion sought. And a daughter who, if that note was genuine, had known exactly which young woman to pass it to at precisely the right moment, to put it in her father's hand. This was not an accident. This was a construction elaborate, precise, built by someone who understood how investigations worked well enough to close one before it properly began. The question was, which someone? Rowan had the motive. He had always struck me as a man who calculated his relationships the way other men calculated their portfolios. But Celia was an architect, an artist, a woman who designed spaces and filled them with intention. If anyone could build something this intricate, it was her. She is waiting. My chest ached in two directions at once. The grief that had lived there for 11 days, pulling one way and something new pulling the other. Something that felt dangerously, painfully close to hope. And hope, I had learned long ago, is far more terrifying than despair. Despair asks nothing of you. Hope demands everything. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and unhurried. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Portland International Airport shortly. Local time is 11:42 a.m. Current temperature a chilly 38 degrees. On behalf of your crew, welcome to Eugene. I folded the cicada drawing and returned it to my pocket. I looked out the window as the clouds broke and the city appeared below. Gray water, dark green hills. It spread out like a circuit board along the edge of the Columbia River. Somewhere down there was a building called the Meridian. Somewhere in that building was apartment 99. And somewhere in that apartment was either the answer to the most important question of my life or the cruelest possible confirmation that grief had finally broken me completely. My hands were shaking again as the plane began to descend. I pressed them flat against my thighs and held them there. Whatever is waiting for you down there, I told myself, you are Leonard Whitfield. You have spent 31 years finding the truth. You can survive finding it one more time. I wasn't entirely sure I believed that, but the ground was coming up fast, and I was out of time to decide. The Meridian had no sign. That was the first thing I noticed when the taxi pulled up to the curb on Park Avenue West, and I stepped out into the cold. Every other building on that block announced itself glass towers, with corporate logos bolted to their facades. Hotel entrances with brass lettering a medical center with its name spelled out in blue LED across the entire top floor. But this building simply existed. 70 stories of dark glass and black steel climbing straight up from the pavement, like something that had grown out of the earth rather than been raised by human hands. Its surface so deeply tinted that the gray city sky threw itself back at me like a mirror. No name, no number, no signal whatsoever that anyone was meant to find it. I checked the address on the black card for the third time. The Meridian Apartment, 99, Portland, Washington. This was the place. I paid the driver, lifted my bag, and stood on the sidewalk a moment, staring up at the building's face, 70 floors. The top of it dissolved into the low cloud cover, and I had the unsettling impression that it didn't entirely end, that it simply went on into something I wasn't equipped to see. Get moving, Leonard, I told myself. You didn't fly 5 1/2 hours to stand on a sidewalk. The lobby doors were black glass set flush into the building's face, nearly invisible, until you were close enough to see your own reflection staring back. I pushed through and stepped inside. The lobby was vast and almost entirely bare. gray marble floors polished to a mirror shine, ceilings that rose 3 stories before meeting a grid of recessed lighting, so understated it seemed the light simply emanated from the air itself. A single security desk at the far end, occupied by a large man in a dark suit, who watched me cross the marble toward him, with the expression of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. No other visitors, no one lingering near the elevators, no coffee kiosk, no seating area, no decorative plants. This was not a building that welcomed casual arrivals. "Help you," the security guard said. I set the key on the desk in front of him without speaking. He studied it for exactly 2 seconds. The specific cut of it, I realized, not me. "Elevator, bank C," he said. "Use the key on the panel inside, 99th floor. "Thank you," I said. "Sir," he added just as I turned away. I looked back. "Welcome to the Meridian." There was something in the way he said it, not as a pleasantry, but as a statement carrying real weight, like he was passing along a fact that mattered. I walked to elevator bank C. 3 elevators there, but only one, the black card, would open, the one on the far right, set slightly apart from the others, its doors the same deep black as the card itself. I inserted the key into a small panel beside the door. A soft chime. The doors parted. The elevator interior was dark wood and brushed steel. No buttons save for a single panel that read 99 and nothing else. The floor beneath my feet hummed with quiet, powerful machinery as the car began to rise, and I watched the floor indicator climb with a speed that pressed me gently but firmly into the back wall. 40 floors, 50, 60. My heart was beating in my ears. My mouth was dry in a way that the coffee at the airport had done nothing to fix. I pressed my hand into my breast pocket and felt the solid weight of the key through the fabric of my coat. And I thought about the cicada, drawing about the 4 words written in Celia's handwriting, and the man outside the church, with his low, careful voice and his almost smile. She's alive, and she needs her father. 70 floors, 80, 90. The elevator slowed, stopped, the doors opened. The first thing I saw was Gareth. He was standing directly in front of the elevator, arms at his sides, feet shoulder-width apart, in the posture of a man who places himself between doors, and whatever lies beyond them as a matter of professional habit. Tall, even taller than he had seemed, on the church steps 6'2", at minimum, built through the shoulders in a way that suggested not vanity but function, the kind of physical conditioning that existed for a specific purpose. Gray eyes that took my measure in the time it took me to draw my first breath of the penthouse air. He wore a dark sweater and dark trousers, no jacket. On his left wrist, a plain black watch. On his right hip, I caught the subtle but unmistakable outline of a holster beneath the sweater's fabric. "Mr. Whitfield," he said. Same voice as the church steps, exactly the same. "You," I said, and my voice came out with more force than I intended, a whole flight's worth of held tension releasing at once. "You could have told me more yesterday on those steps. You could have given me something beyond 4 words and an address. Do you have any idea what the last 18 hours were like for me? I sat on that plane for 5 and 1.2 hours, not knowing whether I was flying toward my living daughter or toward the cruelest joke the universe had ever played on a man my age. Mr. Whitfield." "Don't Mr. Whitfield me," I said sharply. "I want to know." And then I stopped. Because from behind Gareth's left hip, at approximately the height of his mid-thigh, a small face had appeared. She was tiny, 3 years old, round-cheeked, with a head of dark curling hair that she had apparently made no peace with. It went in 4 directions at once, and seemed perfectly happy about it. Her eyes were a striking gray, the particular shade the sky had been when the plane broke through the clouds, light and deep at the same time. She was wearing navy pajamas with small yellow stars on them, and she was holding a stuffed, bare white, well-loved, one ear slightly more compressed than the other, from years of being carried by that particular ear, pressed against her chest with both arms. She looked at me with the frank, total curiosity that only very small children and certain federal investigators ever fully achieve. Then she tilted her head to one side, the dark curls shifting with the movement, and said in a voice as clear and certain as a bell, "Are you Grandpa—" My throat closed completely. 31 years of federal investigations, hundreds of interrogations, moments of real danger, real loss, real revelation. I had held myself together through all of it with the particular iron composure the job demanded, because the job demanded it, and I was good at the job. I was not good at this. My eyes burned so fiercely I had to press my lips together and stare at the ceiling for a full 3 seconds. My chest felt like something inside it had split open along a seam I hadn't known was there. I crouched down slowly until I was at eye level with this small, gray-eyed girl in her star pajamas. And I looked at her face, really looked, and I saw Celia in the set of the eyes and the particular way her chin pointed in the shape of her mouth. Celia, at 3 years old, whom I had photographs of somewhere in a box in my apartment closet. Yes, I managed, and my voice came out barely above a whisper, rough and unsteady in a way I couldn't control. I think I am. The little girl studied me for one more serious moment. Then she held out the white bear toward me with both hands, as solemn as a diplomat presenting credentials. This is Mr. Pennington, she announced. He was scared on the elevator, but he's okay now. A sound came out of me that was half laugh and half something else. Entirely. Something that bypassed every defense I had ever built and went straight to whatever lived behind them. I reached out carefully and shook Mr. Pennington's compressed ear. Tell Mr. Pennington he was very brave, I said. She pulled the bear back and whispered something into its remaining upright ear with great seriousness. Then she looked back at me. He says thank you, she reported. Gareth cleared his throat quietly above us. I stood back up, blinking hard, and found him watching me with those gray eyes that gave away almost nothing. Almost. She said you'd come, he said. Then he stepped aside, opening the path behind him. Follow me, Mr. Whitfield. There's someone who needs to see you. I picked up my bag. My hands were not steady. I didn't care. I followed him. Gareth led me past the main living area of the penthouse without stopping. I caught glimpses as we moved floor-to-ceiling windows showing a panoramic sweep of the Columbia River, the water slate gray and restless under the cloud cover. Furniture that was expensive but lived in a child's drawing, taped crookedly to the refrigerator, a pair of tiny shoes sitting by the couch in the open kitchen. Someone had made this place a home, a real one. We reached a door at the far end of a short hallway. Gareth stopped and put his hand on the knob, then turned to look at me. She's been awake since 5 this morning, he said quietly. Waiting for you. The treatment is working, but she's not at full strength. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you need to say. He paused, and something passed briefly over his face, the shadow of real emotion breaking through his professional composure. She needs calm first. Okay. Okay, I said. My voice sounded remarkably steady for a man whose heart was trying to force its way out through his chest. Gareth opened the door. The room was dim, lit by a single lamp on the bedside table, and the pale gray light filtering through a window, with its curtains pulled halfway across. Medical equipment lined the wall to my left, an IV stand, a monitor, tracing vitals in soft green lines. A small refrigerated unit I recognized as the type used for specialized medications. The room carried a faint smell of antiseptic and something floral, a diffuser on the windowsill putting out thin threads of eucalyptus into the air. And on the bed, propped against a stack of pillows, wrapped in a dark blue blanket pulled to her waist, was my daughter Celia. She was thinner. That was the first thing that landed. Not the medical equipment, not the IV line feeding into her left arm, not the fact that her hair, which had always been thick and dark and full of its own opinions, had thinned dramatically, lying flat against her head, in a way that made her look both younger and older at once. The thinness she had lost weight she couldn't spare, and it had carved her face into something more angular, more exposed, like a figure worked down to its bare essential structure. But her eyes were open, and they were Celia's eyes, dark brown, intelligent, burning with that particular fierce intensity that had been her signature since she was old enough to form opinions, which in her case had been roughly age 4. She looked at me from across the room. "Dad," she whispered, and that was the end of whatever composure I had managed to hold on to across the past 18 hours. My bag dropped to the floor. I crossed the room in 4 steps, pulled a chair to the edge of the bed, sat down and took both her hands in mine, careful of the IV line, desperately careful, and I bent forward over them, and I wept. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying that grief sometimes permits when you are still trying to hold your dignity together, the other kind. The kind that starts somewhere below your lungs and comes up through your whole body, shaking your shoulders, burning your throat, making sounds you would be ashamed of if shame had any hold over you. In that moment, which it didn't, I managed between breaths that kept fracturing before I could complete them. Celia, I'm here. I'm right here. I know. Her hands tightened around mine. Her grip was weaker than I remembered. Celia had always had a strong grip, an artist's grip, but it was there, real and warm and present. I knew you'd come, Dad. I knew the moment Gareth put that card in your hand. You were at the funeral, I said, pulling back enough to look at her face. My eyes were burning, my vision blurred at the edges. That note, the girl who handed me the note. Nadia, one of my students from the studio. A ghost of a smile moved across her face. She had no idea what she was carrying. I just asked her to find the man with gray hair in the front row and put it in his hand. Celia. I pressed her hands harder, felt her fingers curl around mine. What did he do to you? What did Rowan do? The smile vanished. Her jaw tightened, and something old and exhausted passed through her eyes. The look of someone who has been bearing something crushingly heavy for a very long time, and is only now allowing themselves to set it down. Thallium sulfate, she said, in my morning tea. He started 4 months into the marriage. Small doses, consistent, designed to present as a progressive illness. Fatigue, hair loss, tremors, kidney strain. By the time I understood what was actually happening, I had already lost 12 lb, and my hands shook whenever I tried to paint. My stomach turned over so violently I had to press my back teeth together. How did you find out? I asked, my voice dropping to something raw and unsteady. I ran my own blood work through a private lab in Eugene, she said. I told the doctor I was checking for nutritional deficiencies. She exhaled slowly, and it was a sound heavy with everything she wasn't saying. When the results came back, I sat in my car in that parking lot for an hour. Then I called Gareth. And then she said, meeting my eyes directly, I started planning. Because I knew that if I confronted outside the half-drawn curtains, the city's gray sky pressed against the glass. The monitor beside the bed traced its quiet green lines. And in the hallway, I could hear Iris's small voice, telling Mr. Pennington something urgent about breakfast. I looked at my daughter alive, damaged, fierce, and entirely herself, and I felt something shift inside my chest. The grief that had lived there for 11 days didn't disappear, but something moved in alongside it. Something harder and steadier. Tell me everything, I said. She took a breath and she began. We talked for 3 hours. Gareth brought coffee at some point, strong and black in heavy ceramic mugs, and Iris wandered in twice once to show Celia a drawing she'd made of what she described as a green dragon, with feelings, and once to inform Gareth with great urgency that Mr. Pennington needed a snack. Gareth handled both situations with the same unruffled efficiency he seemed to apply to everything. And each time Iris left the room, I watched Celia's eyes follow her daughter to the door with an expression so tender and so fierce at once that it made my throat close all over again. Then the door would shut and Celia would turn back to me, and her face would become something else, focused, deliberate. The face of a woman who had spent months constructing something intricate and dangerous, and was now for the first time walking someone else through every room of it. The body, I said when she paused to take a careful sip of coffee. I need to understand the body first. Everything else can wait. She nodded. She had been expecting that question. Her name was Jane Doe 14. That's what the Florida County records had her listed as, Celia said. An unidentified woman, approximately 30 to 40 years old, recovered from a highway accident outside Ocala. No next of kin, no identification, no dental records anywhere in the system. She had been held in county medical examiner storage for 11 months. My jaw tightened. How did you get access to her through a private intermediary? Celia set the mug down carefully on the bedside table. I won't give you the name, you don't need it, and it doesn't help either of us. What matters is the chain. The body was released to a private mortuary in Florida on paper as an unclaimed cremation. Instead, it was transported by refrigerated vehicle to a facility in Georgia, where a forensic document specialist, someone Gareth had tracked down through his old network, created a complete dental record matching mine down to a childhood filling I'd had done at age 9. Your actual dentist, I said. Dr. Elroy retired 2 years ago and his practice was absorbed by a new group. Celia said his original paper records had been archived, not digitized. Gareth arranged for the archived file to be quietly updated. When Rowan submitted the dental records to the police, they matched what was on file. I sat back in the chair and pressed my hand over my mouth, staring at her. The accident itself, I said. County Road, 4:30 in the morning, she said. No traffic cameras on that stretch. I checked it 6 times over 2 months. The car was mine, registered in my name under my insurance. Gareth drove it out there. The body was already in the passenger seat, secured and positioned. She paused, and something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly, but a heaviness, the weight of a decision made in desperation, and carried every day since. Gareth set the fire. He had arranged a second vehicle a quarter-mile down a side trail off the county road. No cameras, no lights, no houses within 2 miles. He was gone before the fire was visible from the highway. Accelerant on the interior, enough to sustain a temperature above 1 to 800 degrees F. At that temperature, DNA denatures completely. Bone fragments remain but are unidentifiable without a reference sample, and Rowan provided the reference dental records before anyone could request independent verification. Within 4 hours of the accident report, I said. Celia confirmed it. He was ready, Dad. He had been waiting for me to die for months. When the call came that there had been a fatal accident involving my vehicle, he didn't hesitate for a second. He walked straight to his safe, pulled out a folder he had already prepared, and submitted it to the detective on the case. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I didn't realize it until I took a sip and the temperature registered wrong, and even then I barely cared. He had a folder already prepared. I repeated that back to myself, a folder containing my dental x-rays, my insurance records, our marriage certificate, and a notarized letter from him as next of kin, authorizing immediate cremation of any remains. Her voice held steady, but her hands resting on the blanket had slowly curled into fists. He had that folder sitting in his safe before I staged the accident. Dad, he was planning to use it. I just used it first. The room went very quiet for a moment. Outside, the gray Portland light shifted as a break in the clouds let through a thin wash of pale winter sun, and it moved across the floor between us like something slow and intentional. Doc the cicada, I said. That drawing you sent me, that's what you call it. For the first time since I had walked into this room, Celia smiled a real smile, not a faint echo of one, but something that reached all the way up into those dark, exhausted eyes. The cicada shell? She said. A cicada doesn't struggle against the thing that's trying to trap it. It sheds its own skin and leaves the casing behind. A perfect decoy convincing the predator it has found exactly what it was looking for, and while the predator occupies itself with the empty shell, the cicada is already long gone. She held my gaze without wavering. Rowan got my shell, a burned-out car on a dark road, and a folder packed with paperwork. Everything he anticipated, everything he required. And you were already gone, I said. I was already here, she said, building what comes next. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and looked at my daughter, this woman who had been methodically poisoned by the man she married, who had engineered her own disappearance with the precision of a federal operation, who was sitting in a medical bed with an IV in her arm and thinning hair and a 3-year-old daughter in the next room. And I had not felt this in 11 days, something that felt dangerously powerfully close to pride. All right, I said, my voice rough but steady. Tell me about Rowan. Tell me everything he's done, and then tell me what comes next. Celia uncurled her fists. She straightened herself against the pillows, and the look that moved into her eyes in that moment was not the look of a woman who was sick and in hiding. It was the look of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for permission to begin. Where do you want to start? She asked. The $3 billion or Iris. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. Both, I said. Start with Iris. Celia reached for her coffee mug, found it empty, and set it back down with a small, sharp sound of frustration that was so entirely her. So completely the Celia who had applied the same fierce irritation to minor inconveniences her entire life as she did to serious ones that I nearly laughed. Nearly. Iris first, she said, because Iris is the reason everything else matters. She drew the blanket higher across her lap, the way she used to pull her coat tighter when she was bracing herself to say something that demanded steadiness, and she looked at me directly. Rowan is not Iris's father, she said. He has never been Iris's father. He doesn't know that. From the day she was born, he has believed she is his biological child, and I have never told him otherwise. I opened my mouth, closed. It opened it again. Celia, let me finish, she said. I closed my mouth. Before I married Rowan, I knew I wanted a child, she said carefully. I also knew somewhere I wasn't yet ready to fully admit that Rowan was not someone I wanted raising my child. Not really, not deep down. Her jaw tightened briefly, but I was 34. I had been with him for 2 years, and I kept telling myself I was being irrational, that he was ambitious and controlled, but not dangerous, that I was projecting. She stopped, swallowed. I was not projecting, she said quietly. So how did you... I started. Pacific Cryobank, she said. Seattle facility. Anonymous donor. Screened genetic profile. No legal paternity rights under California law. I made the appointment under my maiden name, paid in cash, and told no one. She met my eyes without flinching. I was already 3 months pregnant when I married Rowan. He assumed the timing was natural. I let him assume. Rowan was not the kind of man who questioned things that flattered his ego. A pregnant wife meant he was virile, successful building a dynasty. He never asked for a test. Men like Rowan don't. They assume the world arranges itself around their importance. The enormity of what she was describing settled over me slowly, the way cold settles into a room when a window has been left open a long time, gradually, completely, until it has worked its way into everything. If Rowan is not Iris's biological father, I said, working through it, step by step, the way I always worked through things, then he holds no legal parental rights. Correct. Under Washington state law. Celia said a man who is not the biological father and has not completed a formal adoption process holds no parental rights regardless of marital status, if paternity is legally challenged and DNA testing proves otherwise. And under your father's estate, I began. Whitfield Family Trust, she said, and her voice sharpened with something that sounded like the particular satisfaction of a chess player who had been planning 10 moves ahead for a very long time. Dad's trust specifies that in the event of my death, all assets held in my name transfer to my direct biological descendants, not to a spouse, not to an in-law, to my biological descendants. I felt the shape of it click into place. Iris inherits? I said. Iris inherits everything, Celia confirmed. And Rowan, who has spent 6 years positioning himself as the logical inheritor of Whitfield family assets through his marriage to me, gets nothing. Not $1, not 1 share. He doesn't know I said. He thinks he's Iris's father. Celia said he believes that even if I'm gone, he controls Iris's inheritance as her legal guardian. He thinks he wins either way. Her voice dropped to something quieter and harder. He is wrong on every single count. I got up from the chair because I needed to move, needed to put the energy building in my chest somewhere. I crossed to the window and stood looking out at the gray water of the Columbia River stretching away below us. 70 floors up, the boats looked like punctuation marks on a sentence written in slate and silver. There's more, I said. It wasn't a question. There's more, she agreed. I turned back from the window. He started making plans for Iris, Celia said, and her voice shifted in a way that raised every hair on the back of my neck. It went flat and careful, the way a voice goes when the person speaking is holding something very large in check by sheer force of will. About 8 months ago, Gareth intercepted communications between Rowan and someone we haven't fully identified. Those communications referred to Iris as a liability. The word hit the room like something thrown hard against a wall. A liability, I repeated, and my own voice came out, carrying a cold fury. I hadn't heard in it since the last time I had sat across an interrogation table from someone who had hurt a child. If Iris is gone, Celia said, and I am declared dead, Rowan inherits everything as the surviving spouse under the secondary trust clause, because without a living biological descendant, the trust reverts to the spouse. He had clearly read every page of the Whitfield family trust documents. She pressed her lips together until they went white. He is meticulous, Dad. I will give him that. Where is Iris right now? I asked sharply, straightening. In the next room with Gareth, Celia said. She has not been out of Gareth's sight for 7 months. Not once. Not for a single hour. I exhaled. My hands were pressed flat against my thighs, and I made myself release them finger by finger. Tell me about Gareth, I said. Who is he exactly? How did you find him? Why does Iris call him? Daddy Gareth, Celia said, and something crossed her face that was complicated and warm and sad all at the same time, because she has known him since she was 18 months old, and at that age a man who feeds you breakfast every morning and reads you stories every night earns a title whether he ever asked for it or not. Through the closed door, as if on cue, came the sound of Iris's voice, rising in delight over something, followed by Gareth's low, steady reply. And then Iris, laughing a full, bright, utterly unselfconscious child's laugh that ran through the penthouse and slipped beneath the door into the room where we sat like a sliver of light finding a crack. Celia closed her eyes the moment she heard it. Her whole face transformed, the careful tension draining away all at once, dissolving into something unguarded and total. "She's the reason," Celia said, eyes still shut. "Everything I did, everything I built, every choice I made from the moment I understood what Rowan was, all of it was for her." She opened her eyes and held my gaze. "Help me protect her, Dad," she said. "Help me finish this." My throat went tight again. My eyes were burning again. I seemed to spend a remarkable amount of time in that building, trying not to cry with uneven results. I pulled my chair up closer to the bed and settled back down. "Tell me about the $3 billion, I said, and then we're going to talk about what Rowan does next before he does it." Celia reached for the fresh mug of coffee Gareth had quietly set on the bedside table at some point, wrapped both hands around it, and looked at me over the rim with those dark, fierce eyes, so entirely hers and so entirely alive. "All right, Dad," she said, "let's go to work." The video call connected at 9:17 the following morning. Gareth had built a secure communications setup in the penthouse's main office, a room I hadn't laid eyes on yet, tucked behind a door, indistinguishable from every other door along the hallway, but which opened into something that felt far more like a compact FBI field office than any home workspace. 3 monitors on a standing desk, an encrypted router the size of a hardcover book, with its indicator lights blinking in quiet, steady pulses, soundproofing panels on 2 of the walls, and a whiteboard dense with what I recognized at once as a financial flow diagram. Boxes, arrows, account numbers, and code connecting lines drawn in 3 different colors. I stood in the doorway a moment and took it in. "How long has this been here?" I asked Gareth. 14 months, he said, drawing out the chair in front of the center monitor. "Sit down, Mr. Whitfield. He's been waiting." I sat. The screen filled with the face of Harlan Beckett. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him at Celia's wedding 6 years ago, older and leaner, with new lines carved around his eyes and a grayness to his skin that spoke of too many late nights, and worry carried far too long. But his eyes were unchanged, sharp, dark, precise. The eyes of a man who had practiced law for 43 years and had never once confused loyalty with legality. "Leonard," he said, and the relief in his voice was so immediate and unguarded that it landed squarely in my chest. Thank God you're there." "Harlan," I leaned forward, "you looked at me at the funeral. That look, what were you trying to tell me?" "I couldn't speak," he said at once. "Rowan had positioned himself directly beside me for the entire service. He does that, places himself where he can monitor conversations without appearing to. I watched him do it at board meetings for 2 years. Harlan pressed his fingers briefly to his forehead. "I needed you to know I was aware, that I was watching. That was all I could give you in that room. Why didn't you reach out to me afterward?" "My phone, my email, my office network all monitored," Harlan said flatly. "Rowan had his IT team install tracking software on every device in the EtherX legal department 8 months ago under the cover of a cybersecurity upgrade. I found out when I had my personal laptop swept by an independent technician." A thin, grim smile. "He thought cutting me off from the board and shutting me out of executive communications meant I was neutralized. He was not entirely wrong about the isolation. He was entirely wrong about the neutralized part." "Tell me about the keylogger," I said. Harlan straightened in his chair. 18 months ago, Celia brought me documentation of irregular financial transfers out of EtherX, he said. Small amounts at first, under $10,000, each routed through what looked like routine vendor payments. But the pattern was there for anyone who knew what to look for. He glanced briefly off-screen, then back. "I took what she gave me to a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, Agent Petra Quinlan. I've known Petra for 11 years. She handled the Meridian Capital case I assisted with in 2016. She is meticulous, and she does not move until the evidence is airtight, and she agreed to pursue it. She agreed, Harlan said carefully, that what Celia had documented constituted probable cause for a financial crimes investigation. We filed for a Title III wiretap order under the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act. A federal judge approved it 6 months ago on the basis of the financial evidence, plus additional communications Celia had preserved from Rowan's personal email. He paused. The keylogger was installed on Rowan's primary work terminal and his personal laptop by an FBI technical team during a routine building maintenance window. Rowan was at a conference in Atlanta. He never knew. I exhaled slowly. How much have you collected? 180 days of data, Harlan said, and something in his voice shifted the controlled satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a very long time and can finally see the end of that patience paying off. Email chains directing specific wire transfers, encrypted messages between Rowan and Renata Fenn, laying out the shell company structure calendar entries, referencing meetings that appear nowhere in any official EtherX record, and he reached off and came back holding a folder, lifting it toward the camera. Voice recordings of 3 phone calls in which Rowan explicitly discusses the insurance policy and the timeline for collecting on it. My hands pressed flat against the desk. He said it out loud on a recorded call. He said, Harlan read from the folder, his voice dropping into something deliberate and exact, and I quote, "The policy pays on accidental death. The accident has been confirmed. 30 days for the death certificate, 45 for the estate transfer. By February, we're liquid." End quote. He closed the folder and looked at me through the screen. That call was made the morning after Celia's supposed funeral. Leonard, the morning after. The cold that moved through me then had nothing to do with the winter outside. He was counting money at her funeral. He had been counting it for months, Harlan said. The funeral was simply the day the clock started. I stood up from the chair without deciding to the way your body sometimes moves before your mind has finished processing what it just received. I walked 2 steps to the whiteboard and stood in front of the financial flow diagram. All those boxes and arrows encoded account numbers. I studied it the way I used to study case boards. Across 31 years of federal work, I knew this shape. I had seen versions of it before. Smaller, clumsier, assembled by less intelligent people. This one was elegant. It had been built by someone who understood financial architecture the way Celia understood physical architecture. Every line of defense anticipated. Every exit route mapped. Every exit route except one. Harlan, I said, turning back to the screen, how much time do we have before the signing ceremony? 40 days, Harlan said. Rowan has scheduled the estate transfer signing for day 45 from the date of death certificate issuance. He's invited 40 witnesses. He's already contacted the insurance company to confirm the payout timeline. A pause. He is moving very fast, Leonard, faster than I anticipated. Because he's nervous, I said. Harlan tilted his head slightly. What makes you say that? Because careful men who are confident slow down, I said. They take their time. They enjoy it. I looked back at the whiteboard. Men who rush are men who feel something closing in behind them, even when they can't see it yet. A brief silence on the line. Then Harlan said quietly, Agent Quinlan said almost exactly the same thing last week. And then Agent Quinlan and I are going to get along fine, I said. Set up a meeting, all of us, as soon as possible. Already done, Harlan said. And this time the smile that crossed his face was neither thin nor grim. It was the smile of a 71-year-old lawyer who had spent a very long time waiting to stop playing defense. Day after tomorrow, he said. Eugene Field Office. Petra will be there in person. Agent Petra Quinlan was not what I expected. I had worked alongside FBI agents across 31 years of federal financial investigations, and the ones who handled financial crimes tended to fall into 2 categories. The meticulous bureaucrats who moved through paperwork, like archaeologists brushing dust from ancient artifacts, and the aggressive tacticians who approached every case like a siege. Petra Quinlan was neither. She was 45 medium height, with short dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of economical stillness that comes from years of listening more than talking. She had on a gray blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry apart from a plain watch. When she shook my hand across the conference table at the field office, the grip told me everything. This was a woman who meant what she said. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I've read your Federal Service record, all 31 years of it. Should I be flattered or concerned?" I asked. The corner of her mouth shifted. "Both, probably. Sit down. We have a great deal to cover." Harlan was already at my left, his folder open, a legal pad filled with his small, exact handwriting. Gareth stood near the door. He'd driven me here, and apparently had no intention of sitting in the car. Agent Quinlan glanced at him once, then turned back to me without a word, which told me she already knew precisely who he was. "The financial scheme first," Quinlan said, drawing a thick folder from the stack and flipping to a tabbed section. "Because everything else, the insurance claim, the estate transfers, Rowan's entire endgame runs on the money. Understand the money, and you understand the man." She turned the folder around and slid it across to me. I looked down at the first page and felt my jaw go tight. 31 years I had spent staring at financial fraud diagrams. I had dismantled Ponzi schemes, traced offshore laundering operations, followed money through 17 layers of shell companies across 3 continents. I had seen sophisticated fraud. I had seen elegant fraud. I had seen fraud so meticulously constructed that it took teams of investigators 3 years to unravel. What I was looking at was the best I had ever seen. "Walk me through it," I said. "EtherX Technologies generates approximately $800 million in annual revenue." Quinlan began, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone who had recited these numbers so many times. The shock had long since drained out of them, for her at least. "Over the past 4 years, Rowan Strand and Renata Fenn have systematically siphoned $3 billion from that revenue stream through a network of 200 shell companies. 200, I repeated, registered across 7 jurisdictions," Quinlan confirmed. "Delaware, Cayman Islands, Singapore, Luxembourg, British Virgin Islands, UAE, and Montenegro. Each company receives individual transfers below $10,000, the threshold that triggers mandatory suspicious activity reports under the Bank Secrecy Act. Below that threshold, the transfers read as routine: vendor payments, consulting fees, licensing arrangements." "Structuring," I said. The word came out with the particular distaste I had built up for it over 3 decades. Structuring the deliberate breaking of large transactions into smaller ones, specifically to avoid federal reporting requirements, was a federal crime in its own right, independent of whatever the underlying money was actually being used for. "Classic structuring, yes," Quinlan said, but with a layer of sophistication that took us 8 months to fully map. "Every shell company has a legitimate-looking business profile website. Registered agent apparent business activity. Rowan used the same Big Four accounting firm for EtherX's external audits, 3 consecutive years running. And that firm," she posed, "has since been informed that 2 of its senior partners accepted payments totaling $4 million to exclude the shell company accounts from their audit procedures." "The bribed auditors," I said flatly. "We prefer incentivized non-disclosure in the indictment language," Quinlan said with a dryness I found myself appreciating. "Both partners have been interviewed. One has retained counsel and gone silent. The other is weighing cooperation." I turned to the next page. A network diagram, boxes, lines, account numbers, transfer amounts, dates. I traced one pathway with my finger. EtherX operating account to a Delaware LLC, to a Cayman holding company, to a Singapore investment vehicle, to a UAE private bank account bearing a name I didn't recognize. "This name," I said, tapping the UAE account. "Whose is it?" "A Montenegrin national with no public connection to Rowan Strand or EtherX," Quinlan said. "A known financial intermediary, what we call a nominee account holder. He holds the account in his name for a fee and moves funds on instruction. We've been working with Montenegrin financial authorities for 4 months. They're cooperating." "And where does the money end up?" I asked. "2 primary accounts," Quinlan said. She reached across and turned to a page near the back of the folder. "One in Dubai, one in Montenegro. Combined current balance approximately $1.88 billion. The remaining $1.2 billion has gone to real estate acquisitions in Dubai and Montenegro, art purchases through European auction houses, and what appears to be a private aviation arrangement." I leaned back and pressed my fingers hard against my mouth. $188 billion sitting in offshore accounts, $3 billion moved over 4 years, an infrastructure of 200 companies, bribed auditors, nominee account holders, international financial authorities, and Rowan Strand had been running all of it, while filing accurate internal reports to the Whitfield board, while attending charity galas with Celia on his arm, while putting thallium in her morning tea. He's been building an exit, I said, for at least 4 years. Quinlan confirmed it. The insurance payout and the estate transfer were the final pieces. Once he had the $150 million in insurance money and control of the Whitfield family assets, he intended to vanish. We believe within 60 days of the signing ceremony. To Dubai, I said. Quinlan said it simply. Dubai does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. The room went very still. Harlan had stopped writing. Gareth near the door had his arms folded and his eyes fixed on the middle distance, wearing the look of a man running quiet calculations. I looked at Agent Petra Quinlan across the table. He was never going to stay, I said. The whole thing, the signing ceremony, the 40 witnesses, the performance of grief, it was all a departure gate. Yes, Quinlan said. And Renata? I said. Does she know he plans to leave without her? Quinlan opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she said carefully, That is an excellent question, Mr. Whitfield, and the answer may be the most useful thing we have. She reached for a second folder and slid it across to me. On the tab in clean black type was a single name, Renata Fenn. The second folder was thinner than the first. In my experience, the thinnest folders were often the most dangerous. Thin folders meant concentrated information, the kind of evidence that didn't need volume to be devastating. I opened it. The first page was a surveillance photograph, grainy, taken from a distance with a long lens timestamped 3 weeks ago. A woman leaving a glass office building on Newbury Street in Boston. Tall, early 30s, dark red hair pulled back, a leather portfolio, under one arm large sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She moved with the particular purposeful stride of someone who had somewhere important to be, and intended to arrive there looking like she owned it. Renata Fenn, I said. 36 years old, Quinlan said. Rowan's executive secretary for 4 years. Prior to EtherX, she worked at 2 other financial services firms, both of which experienced irregular accounting discrepancies during her tenure, neither of which resulted in prosecution. Quinlan tapped the photograph. She is not an innocent participant. She understood exactly what she was doing. But I said because there was clearly a but coming. But she is also a woman who has been promised things that Rowan Strand has absolutely no intention of delivering. She believes he is going to leave Celia's estate, which he now considers his, and start a new life with her in Dubai. I turned to the next page, a printed transcript of an intercepted message exchange the keyloggers had worked. Rowan's username on the left, a second on the right, SC Private. I read down the page. Rowan's messages were warm, specific, detailed, the kind of messages a man writes when he needs a woman to believe something completely. References to an apartment he'd allegedly already purchased in Dubai Marina, a specific street, a specific building, a view of the water. You deserve everything I've been promising, just a few more weeks. Renata's responses were shorter, tighter. A woman working hard to sound certain about something she wasn't entirely certain about. I need to know the timeline is real, Rowan. I need more than words. And then Rowan's final message in the exchange, sent 11 days ago, the morning of Celia's funeral. The clock started today. 45 days and we're free. Trust me. I set the transcript down. He sent it the morning of his wife's funeral, I said, while the service was still in progress. Quinlan confirmed it. Their technical team had time-stamped it against the funeral home's official schedule. He had sent it from his phone during the eulogies. I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it. The image of Rowan at that podium's steady hands, practiced grief 11 minutes of perfectly calibrated performance, laid itself over that timestamp and produced a fury in my chest, so cold and so complete that it took genuine effort to keep my voice level. What doesn't Renata know? I asked. Agent Quinlan turned to the folder's final page. A single document, a financial transfer record dated 6 weeks ago. Funds had moved from one of the Montenegro accounts into a new account registered to a shell company that hadn't appeared in the first folder. This account, Quinlan said, pointing to a line near the bottom, was opened 5 weeks ago in the name of a Panamanian holding company, with no connection to Renata Fenn. It had received a transfer of $40 million. She held my gaze steadily. It is Rowan's private exit fund. Renata's name appears nowhere in it. The Dubai apartment he described to her in those messages does not exist. We confirmed that through Dubai Land Department records. He was going to take the money and vanish, I said, without her. Within 2 weeks of the signing ceremony, Quinlan said, based on the flight arrangements we pulled from his calendar private charter, to Dubai one passenger. I looked over at Harlan. He was watching me with those sharp, dark eyes above his reading glasses pen resting motionless on the legal pad. He gave a single small nod, the nod of a man confirming that, yes, it is exactly as bad as it sounds, and yes, it carries exactly the weight you think it does. She doesn't know she's disposable, I said. Not yet, Quinlan said. And that is where you come in, Mr. Whitfield. I straightened in my chair. Tell me about the insurance policy first. All of it. Quinlan drew the first folder back and opened to a tabbed section near the middle. Celia Whitfield Strand held an accidental death and dismemberment policy with Continental Federal Insurance. Face value $150 million. The policy had been purchased in Celia's name 7 years ago before her marriage to Rowan. At the time of purchase, the sole beneficiary was the Whitfield Family Trust. And then it changed. I said 18 months ago the beneficiary designation was updated. Quinlan confirmed the primary beneficiary had been changed to Iris Whitfield Strand. Rowan Strand was listed as secondary beneficiary, meaning he collects only if Iris is deceased or legally incapacitated at the time of the claim. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening, a rightness, the sensation of a piece sliding into a position that had been waiting for it. Rowan doesn't know, I said. Rowan has never seen the updated beneficiary form, Quinlan confirmed. Rowan, I said. Leonard. His voice was warm concern, perfectly calibrated. I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up? I'm getting through it, I said. Day by day. That's all any of us can do. A pause timed with practiced empathy. Listen, I wanted to reach out because there are some estate matters I need to walk you through. Nothing urgent. I just want to make sure you're informed and comfortable with the process. Of course, I said. Whatever you need. I was hoping we could have dinner, Rowan said. Somewhere quiet, just the two of us. I think it would help to talk through things in person rather than over paperwork. That sounds fine, I said. When were you thinking? Friday evening, 7 o'clock. I've taken a table at Sorrento. Celia always loved it there. Before I tell you what I uncovered in that final page and what it revealed about just how far one man was willing to go, let me ask you this. If someone you once welcomed into your family had been quietly working against everything you built, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and let the truth do its own work? He spoke her name with exactly the right weight. Not too heavy, not too light. The weight of a man who has worked his grief down to something manageable and is now responsibly moving on. I had heard that particular calibration before in the voice of a man I'd investigated in 2008, who had defrauded his business partner of $11 million and showed up to the bankruptcy hearing wearing a face full of sympathetic regret. Sorrento is perfect, I said. I'll see you Friday, Rowan. I set the phone on the counter and stood there with my palm pressed flat against the marble, breathing steadily through my nose until the cold fury in my chest settled back beneath the surface where it had to stay. Sorrento was on West 42nd Street, all warm lighting and white tablecloths, the kind of restaurant that exists to make difficult conversations feel civilized. Rowan was already seated when I arrived. A deliberate choice, I noted. Taking his seat first gave him command of the table's orientation, the sightlines, the opening dynamic. I had done exactly that myself in federal meeting rooms, more times than I could count. He rose when he saw me, came around the table, and pulled me into a full embrace, held for 3 seconds. The embrace of a man performing closeness, with technical precision. Leonard, he said, stepping back, hands resting on my shoulders. You look tired. I am tired, I said honestly. That part required no performance at all. We sat. He ordered wine without consulting me. A 2000 Barolo expensive. The kind of selection that announced wealth without appearing to announce it. I registered it and said nothing. Through the appetizers, we covered nothing of substance. The weather. a gallery show Celia had been planning to attend, a memory Rowan produced about a trip they had taken to the Amalfi Coast 2 summers before. He told it well. He told it the way a man tells a story he has assembled, rather than lived each detail placed, rather than recalled the emotional beats, landing with professional timing. I nodded. I smiled in the right places. I asked one or two gentle questions that let him keep talking. I was wearing a recording device the size of a shirt button, taped below my left collarbone, courtesy of Agent Quinlan's technical team. Every word Rowan spoke was traveling in real time to an FBI monitoring station 4 blocks away. The main course arrived. Rowan cut into his steak with the clean, decisive movements of a man who was comfortable with knives, and he looked up at me across the table with an expression of such deliberate gentleness that it turned my stomach. Leonard, he said, we should talk about Celia's estate. I know this is painful, but I believe she would have wanted us to handle it together as family. Of course, I said. What did you have in mind? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He opened it, smoothed it flat against the tablecloth with his palm, and turned it to face me. It's a straightforward agreement, he said. A formal acknowledgement that you have no contestable claim against the Whitfield family, trust assets as currently administered. In exchange, he pointed to a figure near the bottom of the page. He was prepared to offer $5 million as a gesture of family consideration. I looked at the document. Then I looked at Rowan. He was watching me with those steady, confident, perfectly warm eyes. The eyes of a man who had already decided how this dinner would end. $5 million to sign away my daughter's inheritance. $5 million to clear the last obstacle standing between Rowan Strand and everything he had spent 4 years constructing. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. Give me a few days to think it over, Rowan, I said. A decision like this deserves careful consideration. Something moved behind his eyes, the briefest flicker of frustration there and gone in under a second buried beneath the warm, professional surface so quickly that anyone who hadn't spent 31 years watching people suppress their real reactions would have missed it entirely. Of course, he said smoothly. Take all the time you need. He lifted his wine glass toward me. To Celia, he said. I raised mine. And to Celia, I said. And 4 blocks away in an FBI monitoring station on West 42nd Street, every word of it was being recorded. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, 4 days after dinner at Sorrento. I was at my kitchen table going through the document Rowan had handed me. Not reading it exactly more, studying it. The way you study something you already know is a trap searching for the specific mechanism that makes it spring. My reading glasses were on a fresh cup of coffee, was going cold beside my elbow, and the snow outside the window had returned. Falling in that particular lazy way it falls when it has no intention of stopping. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, text message. 3 words. We need to talk. I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back, Who is this? The response came in under 30 seconds. Renata Fenn. Please. Not by phone. In person somewhere he won't look? I set the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface, and looked at the falling snow and thought about what Petra Quinlan had said in the Eugene field office. That is an excellent question, Mr. Whitfield, and the answer to it may be the most useful thing we have. I picked up the phone and called Quinlan. It's Renata Fenn. She just contacted me, I said the moment she answered. A brief pause. How text unknown number. She wants to meet in person. Another pause longer this time. I could hear Quinlan thinking that particular quality of silence that surrounds a person, making a careful, exacting calculation. Meet her, Quinlan said. Wear the device. Public location your choice, somewhere with ambient noise. Do not ask leading questions. Let her talk. Whatever she gives you, however small, is admissible. Understood, I said. And Leonard Quinlan's voice dropped half a register. Be careful with her. She is not innocent, but she is frightened. Frightened people are unpredictable. I chose a coffee shop on Amsterdam Avenue, a small independent place called Kettle and Crow. The kind of establishment that existed in comfortable indifference to the larger world. Mismatched chairs, a permanently steamed-up front window, and a noise level that made private conversation possible without requiring a private room. I arrived 15 minutes early, took a corner table facing the door, ordered a black coffee I actually intended to drink, and waited. Renata Fenn walked in at exactly 2 Uhr. She looked different from the surveillance photograph. In the photo, she had been composed, purposeful, moving through the world, with the authority of someone who knew her own value. The woman who pushed through Kettle and Crow's door and scanned the room with quick, nervous eyes was using the same face but wearing it differently. The confidence had thinned the edges of it, beginning to show. Her dark red hair was down instead of pulled back. She had on a plain gray coat, no leather portfolio, no large sunglasses. She looked like a woman who had spent several nights not sleeping nearly enough. She spotted me, and something in her expression shifted relief, mixed with what looked very much like shame, which I found more telling than anything else she might have shown me. She crossed the room and sat down across from me without a word, pulling off her coat, with quick, slightly unsteady movements. Her hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. She pressed them flat on the table in front of her, looked at them for a moment, then looked up at me. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, controlled, but with something working hard underneath this control. "You reached out to me," I said simply. "I'm here. Talk." She held my gaze for another moment, assessing, I thought, deciding how much to trust a man she had every reason not to trust. Then she reached into her bag and placed a small USB drive on the table between us, without touching it further, as though she needed it to be neither fully in her possession nor fully surrendered. "I have been Rowan's secretary for 4 years," she said. "I know what he has done. I helped him do some of it." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise." "All right," I said. "He told me we were building a future together," she said, and the words came out carrying a bitterness so concentrated it could have stripped paint. "He told me that when everything was finished, when the estate was transferred, when the insurance paid out, we would leave. Dubai, a new life." He showed me photographs of an apartment on the water. "And you believed him," I said carefully. No judgment in my voice, just the neutral acknowledgement of a fact. Her chin lifted slightly. "I wanted to believe him. There is a difference." "There is," I agreed. She pushed the USB drive half an inch closer to me. "3 weeks ago I found a document on his personal laptop. He left it open. I don't know if that was careless or intentional, but I saw it before I understood what I was looking at." She paused. "It was a transfer record. $40 million moved into an account I had never encountered before. A Panamanian holding company. My name was nowhere on it. I have access to every financial account Rowan has ever shown me. I am not on this one." "What else was on the document?" I asked. She pressed her lips together. "A private charter booking. Dubai. 1 passenger. Departure date, 2 weeks after the signing ceremony." I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and held it there, not drinking, just pressing the warmth into my palms. "1 passenger," I said. "1," she confirmed, and her voice broke on the word. A small, sharp sound quickly reined in, but real. 4 years. I gave him 4 years. I moved money I knew I had no business moving. I turned my eyes from things I knew I shouldn't be turning my eyes from. She pushed a hard breath out through her nose. Rowan booked 1 seat. She reached into her bag again and produced a second item, a folded sheet of paper which she opened and slid across the table toward me. I looked down at it. A printed email. Rowan's address in the sender field. The recipient was an address I didn't recognize, a string of numbers and letters that pointed to an encrypted service. The date was 9 days ago. The subject line read, "Post-signing cleanup." The body was short, 4 lines. "SC has served her purpose. She holds too much information to remain a comfortable loose end. Timing post-signing pre-departure. Make it clean. Nothing traceable back to the transition." I read it twice. Then I set it down on the table with very deliberate care. The way you set down something fragile. Not because the paper itself was fragile, but because what it contained required that kind of handling. "He sent this 9 days ago," I said. "Yes," Renata said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "I found it in a folder on his laptop that he believed was encrypted. He used the same encryption software the firm uses for client file. I've known his system passwords for 2 years." I looked at her across the table. Her eyes held something that wasn't quite tears, but lived right next to them. The dry, burning look of someone who had already done all the crying and come out the other side into something harder and colder. "He was going to have you killed," I said. Not a question. "Yes," she said. The word arrived, stripped of everything but its own bare weight. I leaned forward slightly. "The USB drive. What's on it?" She looked at the drive sitting between us. transaction records, internal transfer orders in Rowan's name, email chains between Rowan and the 4 senior partners, and then she stopped, swallowed. A folder of communications between Rowan and the person he hired to follow Iris. 18 months of surveillance on a 3-year-old child. The cold fury that had been living in my chest since Portland moved through me in a wave so complete that for 3 full seconds I couldn't trust my own voice. I pressed my back teeth together, breathed, and waited for it to pass enough that I could speak through it. "There is one more thing," Renata said. Her voice had dropped nearly to a whisper. "He has a meeting this Saturday at a cabin in New Hampshire. He is taking Iris for a weekend visit. He told the nanny it was a bonding trip." She held my gaze without flinching. "The person he hired is going to be at that cabin." My hand moved toward the USB drive. I picked it up and closed my fingers around it. "Saturday," I said. "That is 4 days from now." "Yes," Renata said. I stood up from the table, put the drive in my coat pocket, and looked down at her. "Call Agent Petra Quinlan," I said. "FBI Portland Field Office. Tell her Leonard Whitfield sent you. Tell her everything you just told me and show her everything on that drive." I held her gaze. "If you cooperate fully, she will protect you. That is not a guarantee I can make, but I know Petra Quinlan, and I am telling you it is the truth." Renata looked up at me with those bright, dry eyes. "Is Celia really dead?" she asked quietly, suddenly as if the question had been sitting in her chest for days and had only just found its way out. I looked at her for a long moment. "Call Agent Quinlan," I said, "today." I left 2 $20 bills on the table for the untouched coffee, buttoned my coat against the January cold, and walked out of Kettle and Crow into the snow. I called Gareth before I reached the end of the block. The snow was coming down harder now, settling on my shoulders and the brim of my hat. I walked fast with the phone pressed against my ear, watching the street around me with a particular heightened awareness. The kind that activates when you understand a clock has started counting down, and you cannot see its face clearly enough to know exactly how much time remains. Gareth picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said before I could speak. I stopped walking. "What do you mean, you know?" "Quinlan called me 40 minutes ago." Her team had intercepted a communication between Rowan and the contact in New Hampshire the previous evening. The cabin booking was confirmed Saturday morning, 7 a.m. He'd told the nanny he was taking Iris for a father-daughter weekend. A pause, and in that pause I heard something I had not heard in Gareth's voice, before a tightness, a controlled urgency that told me this man who had carried himself with absolute professional composure through everything I had witnessed was feeling the particular fear that sets in when a child in your protection becomes the target. "Iris has not been out of my sight since I got off the phone with Quinlan. She is right here. She's fine." I exhaled so hard my breath fogged in the cold air in front of my face. "She stays in Portland," I said. "She was never going to New Hampshire," Gareth said with a quiet certainty that left no room for any other possibility. "Rowan can book every cabin in the state. He is not getting near her. What's the plan?" "Quinlan is coordinating." She wanted Rowan to arrive at the cabin on Saturday and find it empty. No Iris, no nanny, no explanation. Let him panic. Let him make calls he shouldn't make from a location already sitting under FBI surveillance. Another pause. "She said to tell you, stay in Boston, be visible. If Rowan calls you Saturday, answer it. Sound worried? Sound like a grandfather who just heard his granddaughter was taken on a surprise trip and can't reach anyone." "He'll call," I said. "When he finds the cabin empty, his first move will be to establish his own alibi by reaching out to people who can confirm he had no idea anything was wrong." "Exactly what Quinlan said," Gareth confirmed. "Gareth." I stepped under a building awning out of the snow and dropped my voice. "The person Rowan hired, the one who was supposed to be at the cabin. Do we know who it is?" "Name is Boyd Farrell," Gareth said. "Freelance. Former military dishonorable discharge, 2 prior arrests for assault. Operates out of upstate New York." A beat. "Quinlan has had eyes on him since yesterday. He drove to New Hampshire this morning. He's at the cabin right now waiting." My stomach turned. "He's already there, which means he's already inside FBI surveillance range," Gareth said. "Quinlan is letting him sit. The moment Rowan fails to appear with Iris Farrell, either leaves, in which case they follow him, or he calls Rowan, in which case that call gets recorded, and adds another layer to the conspiracy charge." I leaned back against the cold marble of the building behind me and worked through the geometry of it. Rowan driving to New Hampshire with a child he meant to harm, a hired man waiting at a cabin, FBI surveillance locked on both ends, and Iris 3 years old navy pajamas with small yellow stars on them, Mr. Pennington tucked under her arm, safe in a Portland penthouse, 70 floors above the river. "Tell her I said hello," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. A brief pause on the line. Then slightly away from the phone, Gareth said, "Iris, your grandpa says hello." And from a distance, small and clear and utterly completely unaware of any of what surrounded her existence, came Iris's voice. "Tell Grandpa Mr. Pennington says hi back, and also we had banana pancakes for breakfast." Something cracked open in the middle of my chest and let in a rush of feeling so acute. "Banana pancakes," I managed. Gareth confirmed it, and I could hear in his voice exactly what I was feeling. Not quite amusement, not quite grief, but that particular fierce tenderness of two men standing on opposite sides of a continent, bound together entirely by their determination that a small girl, who loved banana pancakes and had strong opinions about her stuffed bear, was going to grow up in a world where no one could reach her. Saturday arrived cold and clear. The previous week's snow had packed hard along the sidewalks, the sky a bright, brittle blue. I sat in my apartment and waited. Rowan called at 9:47 in the morning. I let it ring twice before picking up the way a man does when he has been sitting quietly and is only mildly caught off guard by the interruption. "Rowan," I said. "Leonard." His voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but stretched thin over something else, something coiled and urgent that he was working very hard to keep out of his tone. "Have you heard from Celia's nanny? The woman who's been looking after Iris?" I let a note of genuine confusion enter my voice. "Margaret, no. Not lately. Why I drove up to the cabin this morning to spend the weekend with Iris," and a pause. "She's not here. The cabin is empty. Margaret isn't picking up her phone." Would I put alarm into my voice? Not difficult, because the alarm was real. Just redirected. "What do you mean she's not there? Where is she?" "I don't know." His voice tightened further. "I've been calling for 2 hours. I'm going to contact the police if I don't hear something in the next Rowan." I cut across him firm but controlled. "Don't panic. Children's routines get disrupted. Margaret probably took her somewhere for the weekend and forgot to confirm with you. Call the agency that placed her. They'll have an emergency contact." A pause. I could hear him breathing slightly faster than normal. The breathing of a man whose careful plan had just hit an obstacle he hadn't anticipated and was rapidly recalculating. "You're right," he said, drawing the warmth back into his voice with visible effort. "You're probably right. I'll call the agency." "Call me when you find her," I said. "I want to know she's safe." "Of course," Rowan said. "Of course." He hung up. I set the phone on the kitchen table and settled back in my chair and looked out at the sharp blue winter sky through the window. 4 blocks away, or 500 miles away, depending on which piece of this I was measuring, the machinery Celia had set in motion 18 months ago was turning exactly as she had designed it to turn. Every gear meshing cleanly with every contingency accounted for. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. A text from a number I recognized as one of Agent Quinlan's team. "Boyd detained." Rowan's call to Boyd intercepted and recorded. "Rowan leaving New Hampshire now. All good." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table, folded my hands in front of me, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I let myself feel something that was not grief or fury or the cold, disciplined focus of a man working a case. I felt quietly and completely like a father. Not a federal investigator, not a man tracing money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Not a grieving widower sitting in the front pew of a church full of white lilies. A father whose daughter had outthought a monster, whose granddaughter was eating banana pancakes 70 floors above the Columbia River, whose family broken and scattered and reconstructed in ways he never could have imagined, was against every reasonable probability going to be all right. My eyes burned. I let them. Outside, the bright blue winter sky held steady over Boston, and somewhere in New Hampshire an empty cabin sat in the cold, and a very careful man drove back toward a city where everything he believed was already coming apart at the seams. 27 days until the signing ceremony. We were ready. 3 days after the New Hampshire incident, Agent Quinlan called a final planning meeting. Not in the Seattle to the Coast field office this time. She had moved us somewhere cleaner. Quinlan had arranged a secure conference room in a law firm on the 42nd floor of a midtown Boston building neutral ground, away from any location Rowan might have had under surveillance, with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city and a long table that could seat 12, but held only 5 of us. Harlan arrived first, as he always did, with his folder and his legal pad, and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Gareth came in 2 minutes later, having made the cross-country flight that morning. He had left Iris in the care of 2 FBI protective detail agents at the penthouse, a fact that I knew cost him something real, though he would not have said so. Quinlan was already at the head of the table when I arrived, her laptop open, a series of photographs and documents, spread in a precise grid across the table's surface, and at the far end in a wheelchair, because Harlan had insisted, and she had argued about it for 20 minutes before conceding, was Celia. I stopped in the doorway when I saw her. She had been in Eugene the last time I saw her, pale-thinned horizontal. Now she was upright, dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, her thinning hair pulled back with the same decisive practicality she had always applied to things she couldn't change. She looked fragile the way a structure looks fragile when it has been tested by real force and held. Not weakened exactly, but showing its load. Her eyes, when they found mine across the room, were completely alive. "You flew," I said. "Gareth drove me to the airport," she said. I argued about the wheelchair the entire ride. "I know," Gareth said from behind me, with the flat patience of a man who has had this conversation before. "You lost." Celia pointed at him, noted for the record. I crossed the room and pulled a chair close to hers and sat down. She reached over and gripped my hand once hard, a brief, fierce pressure, and then let go and turned to face the table, like a general turning to face a map. "All right," Quinlan said, pulling the room's attention without raising her voice. "We have 24 days. Let's use them well." She walked us through it, in order the way she walked through everything methodical, complete nothing left to inference. Rowan had returned from New Hampshire in a controlled panic that he was managing with characteristic precision. He had filed no missing person report. Doing so would have drawn attention to the cabin and to Boyd, whose detention he almost certainly knew about by now through back channels. Instead, he had contacted the nanny agency, been told that Margaret had taken emergency family leave, and had quietly arranged for Iris to be brought back to Boston under the supervision of a new caregiver he had personally selected. He selected her himself, Quinlan said, which means he vetted her himself, which means he trusts her in ways he does not trust, people he hasn't personally vetted. We ran her clean record, genuine credentials. She is not part of his network. She is simply someone he chose carefully because he can no longer afford careless choices. "He's tightening," I said. "He's scared," Celia said quietly from beside me. "When Rowan gets scared, he contracts. He pulls everything close and controls it harder. It's what he did every time a board meeting went sideways. He would spend the next week micromanaging every person around him." She paused. "It makes him predictable, which is exactly what we need him to be for the next 24 days, Quinlan confirmed. She turned to the documents on the table and began moving through them one by one. Harlan walked us through the legal architecture first. The Whitfield family trust documents had been reviewed by 3 independent estate attorneys, all of whom arrived at the same conclusion. Rowan held no direct inheritance rights. Iris, as Celia's biological daughter, was the primary heir. Celia, very much alive, superseded the entire question. The death certificate issued after the staged accident would be formally voided by court order. The moment Celia made her existence known, a process Harlan had already filed the preliminary paperwork for under seal. The insurance claim, Harlan continued turning a page in his folder, has been frozen by Continental Federal Insurance, in cooperation with the FBI since the day Rowan filed it. The claim itself constitutes federal insurance fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1033, combined with the wire fraud charges from the financial transfers, the conspiracy to commit murder charges from the Boyd operation, and the thallium poisoning. He looked over his reading glasses at the table. Rowan Strand is looking at federal charges that carry a combined maximum sentence of over 100 years. That figure hung in the air. Gareth, arms crossed, chair tilted back, had been tracking each speaker with the same unhurried attention throughout. Now he cut in, "Where does Renata fit into all this?" Quinlan answered without hesitation. Renata Fenn entered a full cooperation agreement with this office 6 days ago. She has handed over her testimony, the contents of the USB drive, and a personal email archive material that brought 17 additional documented incidents of financial fraud onto the existing charge sheet. Her end of the deal, a 5-year suspended sentence forfeiture of everything she received from Rowan and supervised release. Silence held for a beat. She'll take the stand at trial as well. Harlan offered his assessment in that quiet, unhurried way of his, the manner of someone who had spent 4 decades gauging how juries think. Articulate, he said, visibly remorseful. And she was inside the operation she'll be describing, not watching from the outside. That particular combination tends to land. Quinlan moved to the last item spread across the table, a floor plan. The Obsidian Gate Tower. Rowan had renamed it from Harrison Tech 18 months ago, not long after engineering his way into effective operational control of the company. 70th floor, the penthouse conference suite, that was the room. That was where the signing was set to happen. Rowan has locked in 40 witnesses, Quinlan said. 12 attorneys or legal representatives, 8 contacts from the financial world. The other 20 are press. He reached out to journalist Leonard. He wants a paper trail, a visual record, a room full of people prepared to swear under oath that everything unfolded properly. He's after legitimacy. I said he's after theater. Celia said it with an edge in her voice, something sharp and certain. He's always needed a crowd. The bigger, the more it feeds him. He believes the witnesses insulate him. That with 40 sets of eyes in the room, the thing becomes unchallengeable, unassailable. She glanced toward Quinlan. He's going to get his crowd all right. Quinlan turned to face Celia. Walk us through your role. Celia pulled herself upright in the wheelchair. She reached into the bag at her side and drew out a single sheet of paper, setting it down on the table before her. A typed outline, clean, spare nothing, wasted. Each line was a cue in a production she had spent 18 months building from the ground up. I get to the building ahead of Rowan, she said. Gareth brings me in through the service entrance. There's a service elevator on the floor plan that goes straight to 70 without touching the main lobby. I hold in the auxiliary conference room that connects to the main suite and wait until the ceremony is already moving. Her finger traced the page downward. The instant Rowan slides the documents in front of Leonard for signature, I come through the connecting door. In front of 40 witnesses, Harlan said. In front of 40 witnesses, Celia confirmed 8 of them journalists. Then the evidence. Quinlan picked it up. The main display in the conference suite will be tied to a secure feed running from Harlan's team. Celia continued. The second I step into that room, the feed goes live. Keylogger footage, financial transfer records, the Boyd Farrell communication, the thallium purchase documentation. A beat. Every piece of it in order on a screen large enough that no one in that room can look away. The silence that followed was not the silence of an empty space. It was dense and pressurized, the kind that builds when people are taking in the full shape of something, understanding for the first time what it will actually look like. Then I turned to look at Celia, there beside me. Her eyes were on me, dark, alive, alert. Everything was in them. The 18 months of preparation, the suffering, the thallium, had put her through the time lost from Iris. The painstaking assembly of every piece now sitting on this table. A gaze steadier than anything I'd managed to hold in weeks. Dad, she said, her voice low, when you see me come through that door, I know, I said. Don't let it show, she said. Whatever's in you at that moment, hold it until Rowan reacts. His face has to go first. The cameras need to be on him before they're on anything else. I sat there looking at her in that wheelchair, diminished in body, unmistakable in will, carrying every mark of what had been done to her. And still 2 weeks from bringing down the thing she had built, at the cost of nearly everything she had. And I felt something that can only be called pride, except that it had grief threaded all the way through it. Grief that was not incidental but structural, the thing that gave the pride its full, irreducible weight. I won't let it show, I told her. She held my eyes one moment longer, then one nod, and she turned back to face the table. 24 days, she said. Let's see it through. Day 45's morning came in the way some mornings do, without announcement, without any sense of its own significance, as if the hours had arrived not knowing what they were about to hold. I was up before 5. I'd managed perhaps 3 hours of sleep, which was 2 more than I'd thought I'd get. I put coffee on, pulled on my robe, and stood at the window watching Boston surface from the dark. gray January pre-dawn, the first delivery trucks nosing down the street, early joggers, windows across the way lighting up one by one as the city assembled itself again with that vast, magnificent indifference it has to any particular morning, being unlike the others. I got into the shower. I shaved with attention, the kind you bring when the face looking back at you is going to be observed by people who notice things. The dark charcoal suit went on next the one I had worn to every proceeding of consequence in my federal career. Not quite superstition, more like the steadiness of a familiar thing. White shirt, navy tie, my father's cufflinks, silver, plain the kind that carry no signal and ask for no attention. 2 messages on my phone when I lifted it off the nightstand. The first was from Quinlan, time-stamped 4:47 a.m. All positions confirmed. 12 agents on site. Feed tested and operational. We're ready. The second was from Celia. 4:59 a.m. 4 words. Today we fly, Dad. I read it twice, held my thumb against the screen. Then I slipped the phone into my breast pocket, took my coat from the hook, and walked out. The Obsidian Gate Tower occupied the corner of 6th Avenue and 53rd Street. 70 floors of dark glass that took the thin winter light and returned it in cold, flawless planes. I had come past this building countless times over the years, when it still bore the Harrison Tech name, when my family's identity was still woven into its signage, its lobby, the portrait of my father that used to hang on the eastern wall, the receptionist who recognized my face without needing to be told the executive corridors, where Celia once brought her paintings to hang. Rowan had pulled that portrait down 8 months ago. In its place, an abstract sculpture at $400,000 that communicated nothing to anyone. I came through the lobby doors at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the ceremony was due to start. Rowan had done to the lobby what he did to every space he claimed poured money into it, shaped it into a statement, deployed the aesthetics of a man who had long understood that the surface of things is its own kind of argument. White floral arrangements massed on every surface. A registration desk positioned near the elevator bank, staffed by a young woman in a black blazer, working from a list distributing embossed programs. I told her my name. She went straight to it, top of the list, underlined. "Mr. Whitfield," she said with a smile practiced to the point of warmth. "Mr. Strand is expecting you. 70th floor. The elevators are ready for you." "Thank you," I said. 45 seconds elevator to the 70th floor. I counted everyone. The conference suite ran the full eastern face of that level, a high-ceilinged room, enormous all floor-to-ceiling glass, facing out across midtown Boston. The city below in its full compressed complexity. A long table down the middle, already lined with people. The lawyers, the financial figures. The journalists Rowan had hand-selected and assembled here, with the precision of someone who'd been thinking about this room for months. Low voices folded against the glass. At the far end stood Rowan, mid-conversation with 2 men in suits that announced their price without trying to. He caught me the instant I cleared the doorway. His expression shifted into something open and welcoming, and he came across the room with his arm already in motion, the entire movement carrying the ease of a man who felt at home in his own theater, who had been preparing for this particular performance longer than most people in the room knew. "Leonard," both hands around mine, "I'm glad you came. I know what it cost you to be here." "It's where I need to be," I said. He steered me to the chair immediately to his right, the position of family, of trust of a man who had been brought in and honored. I sat, laid my hands flat on the surface in front of me, and took in the room. 40 people, 8 journalists, including 2 I placed from major financial publications, notebooks, open pens, moving. 12 lawyers massed at the far end in a tight formation, briefcases squared away with the care of professionals who account for every minute. The display panel on the eastern wall sat dark, a wide, high-resolution screen, with a sightline from every chair in the room. Harlan was 3 seats off my left shoulder. He'd chosen that spot deliberately near enough to reach distant enough to look accidental. He caught my eye for the briefest instant, then dropped his gaze back to the document before him. His face showed nothing beyond a 71-year-old attorney examining routine paperwork. His hands, I noticed, were perfectly still. Mine were not. I pressed them flat against the table and held them there. Rowan moved to the head of the room, and the low murmur of voices died into attentive silence. He thanked everyone for coming in, that voice of his warm, measured, pitched to fill a high-ceilinged room without effort, every syllable calibrated to land correctly. He said he knew Celia would have been grateful for the respect and care this gathering represented. He let the pause that followed sit for exactly the right duration, carrying exactly the right weight. What we're here to accomplish today, he said, is honoring her legacy, ensuring that everything she built moves forward with stability and clarity. That's what she would have wanted. Heads nodded around the table. One of the journalists put something down in her notebook. I let my gaze move to the connecting door on the south wall, a door that everyone in this room would read as a storage access or secondary exit, a door behind which, at this very moment, Gareth was standing in the auxiliary conference room with Celia beside him. Rowan settled into his chair. His assistant set a stack of documents before him, clean-ordered, each section tabbed with a different colored marker. Rowan lifted the top set and slid it along the table in my direction with the smooth efficiency of a man conducting a transaction he had rehearsed until it felt like instinct. Straightforward documents, he said with the quiet confidence of someone who had practiced that sentence until it needed no practice at all. A formal acknowledgement of the estate transfer as structured under the trust administration. Page 4 is where you sign Leonard. Harlan has reviewed everything. He held my gaze with those steady, assured eyes. I picked up the pen his assistant had set beside the papers. I turned to page 4. I found the signature line a clean blank space, waiting the most expensive blank line I had encountered in 31 years in this business. I positioned the pen above it. The room had gone very quiet. 40 people, one pen, one line. I held it there. 5 seconds. 6. 7. And then from the south wall came the sound of a door handle turning. Every head swiveled toward it, the instinctive, simultaneous rotation of 40 people responding to something they hadn't anticipated. Rowan was the last to turn because Rowan had been watching me, and something in my face at that moment, something I couldn't fully govern. Some small, involuntary shift made him turn slowly, with the particular wariness of a man who has just felt the earth shift beneath him and hasn't yet determined how badly. The connecting door swung open and Celia Whitfield walked through it. The room stopped breathing. That is the only description that fits. 40 people, mid-breath, mid-thought, in the middle of half-formed sentences, and then nothing. A total, complete suspension of everything. The specific stillness that only arrives when the mind encounters something. It has no ready framework for something that requires a full second just to register. Celia stood in the doorway wearing a white suit. The choice was deliberate. I understood at the moment I saw her the kind of understanding that doesn't require explanation. White was the color of the casket Rowan had chosen for her funeral. White was the color of surrender. She had always said she would reclaim it. She was wearing it now, not as defeat, but as declaration. Her hair was short, grown back unevenly from the thallium's damage, and she had made no effort to conceal that no wig, no styling arranged to soften what had been done to her. She stood straight, chin level, dark eyes moving across the room with a thoroughness that missed nothing and dismissed nothing. In her left hand she carried a single folder, thin and dark, held against her side with the composed certainty of someone who knows precisely what they're holding and exactly what it represents. She looked, I thought, like someone who had walked through fire, not unmarked by it, but not broken by it either, carrying the marks, openly making them count. 3 full seconds. Nobody moved. Then the room came apart, voices erupting all at once, shock and confusion colliding. A journalist half rose from her chair with one hand pressed to her mouth. One of the lawyers sent his water glass rolling off the edge of the table where it hit the floor and shattered. 2 people spoke simultaneously in the high, urgent pitch of genuine disbelief. The sound bounced off the glass walls and came back doubled and tangled. Celia held her place in the doorway without moving, her eyes fixed on Rowan and never leaving him. Rowan, I had been watching him. I had made Celia a promise that I wouldn't react until he reacted first. I kept it by locking my eyes on his face the instant that door handle turned. I had 31 years of reading people in their worst, most unguarded moments. What moved across Rowan Strand's face in those first 3 seconds was the most total unraveling I had ever seen in another person. It began in his eyes, the warmth that manufactured warmth he wore like a second layer of skin, practiced into near perfection, simply fell off him as though the muscles that sustained it had lost their signal all at once. What showed underneath was not grief, not confusion, not the disorientation of a man confronting the impossible. What showed underneath was recognition. He knew immediately. He knew before his mind could build a denial, before his body could compose a reaction. He knew, and the knowing dismantled him. That dismantling was visible on his face for 4 full seconds, before he managed to pull anything back across it. His hands went flat on the table and pressed down hard, hard enough to drain the color from his knuckles, hard enough that the tendons in his forearm rose against the skin. His jaw locked. His breathing shifted shallow, fast, the involuntary response of a body that has received information the mind is still refusing to accept. "Hello, Rowan," Celia said. Her voice was steady and clear, and it reached every corner of that room, as though the room had been built to carry it. "And did you miss me?" Rowan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time in 6 years of watching this man command rooms and manufacture composure under sustained pressure, I watched him come up empty. The display screen on the eastern wall lit up. Harlan had the remote. I caught the motion from the corner of my eye, a small decisive press, and the screen filled with the first image, a financial transfer record, dates, stamped account numbers, plainly visible. Rowan's digital signature running along the bottom of the authorization. Audio came through the room's speakers. Simultaneously, Rowan's voice recorded clean and unmistakable: "The policy pays on accidental death. The accident has been confirmed. 30 days for the death certificate. 45 for the estate transfer. By February, we're liquid." Notebooks appeared across the table instantly, every journalist's pen already moving. That recording, Harlan said, rising and addressing the room with the settled authority of a man who had spent 43 years making himself heard in rooms full of powerful people. That recording was made on the morning of Celia Whitfield's funeral. It was captured under a federal Title III wiretap order issued by the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington. He turned a page in his folder. The insurance claim filed by Rowan Strand against Continental Federal Insurance for $150 million constitutes federal insurance fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1033 and is hereby formally contested by the insured party, who is, as everyone in this room can now plainly see, very much alive. While Harlan spoke, Celia had been crossing the room, moving to the table, setting her folder down at the empty chair, positioned between me and the head of the table, Rowan's right-hand seat. The position reserved for someone who belongs there by right. She drew the chair out and sat with the deliberate ease of a woman, reclaiming something that was always hers to reclaim. She opened her folder and slid a document across the table toward Rowan. "The Whitfield Family Trust," she said, "has never been transferred. The death certificate issued in my name is void. The court order voiding it was filed this morning at 7 a.m. by Harlan Beckett on my behalf." She held Rowan's gaze across the table with those dark, alive, implacable eyes. "You have no claim to this estate, Rowan. You have no claim to the insurance policy. You have no claim to this company, and you have no claim to my daughter." Rowan shoved back from the table and got to his feet. "This is," he started, and his voice came out wrong, too high, too fast, the voice of a man whose instrument had abandoned him precisely when he needed it. "This is fabricated. All of it. You staged your own death. You committed fraud. You, Mr. Strand," the voice came from the back of the room. Agent Petra Quinlan walked forward from the doorway, where she had been standing unnoticed since 2 minutes into the ceremony. Behind her, 4 FBI agents in dark jackets moved into position, 2 at the room's exits, 2 flanking the table. Quinlan covered the length of the table and planted herself squarely opposite Rowan. One hand went up with her credentials, the other unfolded a document and laid it between them. "Rowan Strand," she said the words flat and exact, the tone of someone who has rehearsed nothing, because nothing needs rehearsing. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, insurance, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and criminal structuring under the Bank Secrecy Act." The arrest warrant went down on the table in front of him. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Rowan's eyes moved to the warrant, to Celia, to me. I looked back at him across the surface of that table, the table in a building whose foundation still carried my family's name, that he had stripped and renamed and remade in his own image. I held the look. I didn't turn away. I didn't offer a word because the room had already spoken, and it had said everything more precisely than I ever could have. The agents on either side of the table closed in. Rowan offered nothing, no resistance, no attempt. The force that had driven him through 4 years of this was simply gone, evacuated the instant Celia came through that door. I'd seen it leave, watched whatever animated and sustained him drain clean away, as if it had passed right out through the leather of his shoes and into the floor beneath him. The man they were putting handcuffs on had already lost. He'd known it before the cuffs were out, known it from the moment a woman he had buried stood in a doorway he'd been certain no one would ever open again. All around us the room had come apart. Journalists with phones raised lawyers pulling into tight, urgent knots. Somewhere behind me, someone was crying. I had no idea who, and didn't look. Celia sat to my left spine, straight hands quiet on the table, her gaze tracking Rowan all the way to the elevator, the steady, deliberate attention of a woman who had given up nearly everything to get to this moment and was not about to look somewhere else. I moved my hand across to hers. Her palm turned over, and her fingers closed around mine, that grip. Not what it had been, but rebuilding itself week by week, the grip of someone working their way back, and she held. No words passed between us. For the first time in 45 days, that was exactly right. The rhythm of the days changed after day 45. Before every hour pressed down with the weight of what was still unfinished. After time opened out, again not to normal, not all the way, but to something a person could inhabit, without bracing against it, which was more than most of the previous 45 days had offered. Rowan went into federal custody that same afternoon. Bail was denied in 4 minutes flat. The indictment came down the next morning. 47 pages, 31 separate charges, enumerated in the flat, pitiless language of federal law. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, criminal structuring. I went through every page at the kitchen table. The coffee beside me went cold, and I didn't notice. And sitting there, I felt something 6 years of Sunday dinners and managed handshakes and private suspicion had kept just out of reach. The relief of being right, confirmed irrevocably at last. Bringing Celia back on paper took 11 days. 11 days to dismantle what Rowan had put in place in 72 hours. Identity documents restored, accounts unfrozen. The Whitfield Family Trust verified intact, untouched exactly as it had been. Harlan worked through it piece by piece with the patience of someone who had held this task in reserve for 18 months and was not about to rush it now. She rebuilt the trust structure before she went under. He told me one morning over coffee, setting his cup down, with something that looked a great deal like satisfaction. Rowan was never inside it. He believed he was. But every filing he made after her staged death rested on a legal foundation that had never existed. She constructed the lock before she created the need for a key, I said. Precisely, Harlan said, and the look on his face was the look of a man who had built that lock alongside her and intended to feel good about it for the rest of his years. Renata showed up in federal court on day 63. 5 years suspended full, asset forfeiture, supervised release. Quinlan rang me after 4 hours on the stand, she said, and Renata had been rock solid throughout. She had a message to pass along. What was it, I said. She said, "Tell Mr. Whitfield. I'm sorry, not for getting caught, for doing it at all." I turned that over for a while. "Tell her I received it," I said. Day 71. Celia picked up a brush for the first time since before the thallium. I was in the kitchen when the quality of the silence shifted, took on a certain density, the kind that only settles when someone has gone somewhere deep inside their own work. I left it alone. 3 hours on, she came through the door with the canvas still wet and set it down on the table where I was sitting. A cicada in mid-flight wings, fully open light, catching the body each detail, rendered with a care that felt almost fierce. Not clinging to something, not pulling free of something. Flying, already clear, moving through open air with the conviction of a creature that has left every old constraint behind for good. My eyes stung the second I took it in. "Val," I said, just that, nothing else available. "It's yours," she told me. "Always was going to be." I pressed my palm flat against my mouth and stayed with it. This thing she had made with hands still in recovery with vision that nothing had been able to touch. And inside me, grief and gratitude and love had twisted themselves into a single thing that didn't have a name for it. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, I told her, and the last word fractured on the way out, and I made no effort to stop it. Celia settled into the chair across from me and covered my hand with hers. The grip had more in it than the last time I'd noticed, and the time before that too, returning to itself. The way she was returning to herself. Harlan rang this morning, she said, keeping her voice low. What did he have? I asked. Something moved through her eyes, not the brightness of tears, but the other kind, sharper and better. The court approved the name change, she said. It's done, Dad. It's official. I looked at her through the morning light coming in across the kitchen table, with the cicada painting lying between us. Whitfield and daughter, I said. That smile came fully alive in her face, all the way up into her dark eyes. Whitfield and daughter, she said. 6 months past day, 45, the name came home. A Thursday morning in late July, the crew went up letter by letter against the dark glass of the building's face. Whitfield and daughter incorporated in a typeface that Celia had drawn herself. The two W's locked together at their centers, like a cicada's wings caught mid-stroke. I stood on the far sidewalk along 6th Avenue, coffee warming in my grip, and watched each piece go up and felt something, for which I still have no exact word, a fullness, a closing, the return of something removed so incrementally over so many years that I hadn't registered the full loss, until I stood watching it be given back. Gareth was next to me. How's it feel, he said. Like it should have happened years ago, I told him. And right on schedule, he said, and nodded. Then after a beat, she's asked me to stay on. Director of Security. I know, I said. She mentioned it. I said yes, he told me. Did you spend any time thinking about saying no? Not 1 second, he said immediately. Not even close. The reopening fell on that Friday evening. 300 people came through the lobby, clients, former colleagues, press, and a number who had been in that 70th floor conference suite on day 45, and had been telling the story to anyone who'd listened ever since. My father's portrait was back on the eastern wall, brought up from the storage room where Rowan had buried it. He looked the same as he always had, measured, solid, the face of someone who had constructed something worth constructing and trusted it to hold. It was holding. Celia worked the room in a red dress, sparkling water in hand, moving and laughing and talking with the naturalness of a person entirely at peace with taking up space, which had always been her gift, which thallium and calculated cruelty had not managed to take. I followed her from across the lobby with the attention I had given her whole life, that particular helpless watchfulness of a parent who looks at their child and still cannot fully accept that this person is real and here in theirs. I was still watching her when something small made contact with my right leg, both arms wrapping around it with absolute unconditional force. I looked down. Iris was looking back up at me, dark curls spectacular, as always wearing a red dress that was clearly no accident. Mr. Pennington under her arm, his one upright ear angled toward the warm light of the lobby. Grandpa, she announced with the authority of someone conducting official business. Mr. Pennington says this is a very good party. I folded myself down to her level and took in her face those gray eyes, Celia's chin, the expression of a child who has made a firm determination that you are deserving of her complete regard. Tell Mr. Pennington I am in full agreement, I said. She pivoted toward him and delivered the message in a careful whisper with appropriate ceremony. Then she looked back at me. He says thank you, and also can we have cake? I laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that rises from somewhere deep in your chest and just takes over. I scooped her up, and she wrapped both arms around my neck, pressed her warm cheek against my jaw, and I stood there holding my granddaughter in the lobby of the building that carried my family's name once more. Across the room, Celia was watching us. She lifted her glass of sparkling water in my direction, a small, quiet toast, meant for no one but me. I nodded back. Iris patted my cheek with one little hand. Grandpa, cake, cake, I agreed, and I carried her through the lobby of Whitfield and daughter toward whatever came next. My daughter's eyes warm on my back, my granddaughter's laughter ringing in my ear, and the city alive and indifferent and magnificent beyond the glass. Standing at the top of the tower that bears our family name, a single truth holds. The truth is never buried. It only waits for the right moment to surface. Yet family revenge was never my life's goal, but protecting my blood is my deepest instinct. I spent my career chasing numbers, and I nearly lost what mattered most because of my own blind spots. This is the most expensive lesson I have ever learned paid for in tears. Never place blind faith in the polished facade of others. Greed can turn the people closest to you into something unrecognizable. My sincere advice, don't be like me. Don't wait for tragedy to arrive before you start paying attention. Wake up before the poison works its way into your own life. I believe God is always watching. He allows evil to flourish for a season only to test the resolve of the righteous. But the new lives of Celia and Iris have only just begun. My position is clear. Those who sow the wind will reap the whirlwind. Never extend mercy to those who set out to destroy your home. Justice in the end finds its way back. And in stories like this one, it will stand as a warning to anyone who dares to dishonor the bonds of. That is where Leonard's story rests, not in the wreckage, but in what was recovered from it. Celia, alive. Iris, safe. The building with their name on it still standing. I want to sit with you here for a moment because this story cost more than I can fully account for. It cost years. It cost grief that was never supposed to end. It cost a father the dignity of mourning his own daughter, while the man responsible stood at a podium performing it. I believe God permits certain seasons of darkness not to break us, but to strip away every false comfort until what remains is only what is true and what is ours. That is what this season did for Leonard. It left him with his daughter, his granddaughter, and a clarity about the people in his life that no amount of prosperity had ever given him. If this story taught anything, let it teach these things. Trust is not owed to anyone simply because they share your table. Watch what people do when they believe no one is paying attention. That is who they are. If something feels wrong about a person, do not wait for proof before you start paying closer attention. Instinct is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition your mind has already done. Never let grief make you a passive witness to your own life. Leonard nearly lost everything because his loss made him step back, step forward instead. And if you ever find yourself holding a key and an address and a note that makes no sense, follow it. The truth has a way of leaving doors open for the people who are ready to walk through them. If this story moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What stayed with you? What hit close to home? Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed to Family Revenge Stories so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for being here and for listening all the way through. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.